And one of the guys standing beside me, he punches me with his elbow, and he goes like that. And I turn around and look up. There is a big alpha male standing there on top of the levee, literally with his toes were less than 6 feet above our heads. And he's just standing there glowering down on us like that. And now you talk about a brown shorts moment. That was about it. I'm Tim Baker, also known amongst my friends and in a portion of the Bigfoot world as Coonbo Baker. And that's a nickname that I got years ago. That was stuck on me by some friends that I used to deer hunt with. We're here on my farm, and I was raised here and actually saw my first Bigfoot here when I was 4 years old. I began to learn about Bigfoot when I was about 2.5. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, my mom and dad, and folks that worked here on the farm taught us about Bigfoot from a young age. My grandmother referred to them as the neighbors. And I remember the first time she sent me over to the back of the farm to plant a bunch of beans and cantaloupes and things like that for the neighbors. I told Granny, I said, we ain't got any neighbors that lives back there. And she said, oh, yes, you do. You know, I heard about them, I guess, most of my whole life. I got very interested in them back in the, when I was in college, back in the mid 70s. I was around them a lot. The first time I ever attempted to call one, I was, I believe I was 12, going to turn 13. But I believe first time I called one, I was 12 years old. And it came. My dad and I were out fishing and heard one hollering and yelling up the slough from us. And I decided to try to call it. And I did. And it, like I said, it came to us. And my dad was afraid it was going to get us. And we cranked up the boat and got out of there. I didn't talk about them very much because a fellow that I went to school with that lives about a mile west of where we're sitting right now, he got to talking about them at school, and the rest of the kids teased him mercilessly. So I just kept my mouth shut about them, but I still tried to learn everything I could about them. And I still very vividly remember when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out, and we first saw that around 67, 68. And my mother, she was so excited the first time she read about them. She said, oh, these things, they call them Bigfoot. But we here in Alabama had never heard the word Bigfoot. And we referred to them as my dad and my grandfather called them catamounts. Like I said, my grandma called them the neighbors or those wild men or those hairy people or something like that. Some of the folks called them no-heads, hanks, boogers. My great-grandmother called them nununui. That's the Cherokee name for them. And there was something else out there that I'm not exactly sure what she was talking about, but she used to had another name that she would use for something that was out there that she was terrified to even say the name out loud. If she ever mentioned it, she would call us together in a little huddle, and she would be out in the middle of an open area where nothing could be hiding that could hear her, and she would whisper it to us. She would tell us that the nununui protected us and watched over us and protected us from this other creature. But anyway, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was in construction, and he built a number of buildings up on Redstone Arsenal, which became, and part of Redstone Arsenal became Marshall Space Flight Center after NASA was started. and there were a bunch of the Germans were up there. And he took me up there when I was just about a 7-year-old kid, and I got to see them, firing some of the engines on a test stand, and they actually launched some kind of a pretty decent sized rocket up there. Now this didn't, going up from Redstone, it did not, it didn't go into orbit or anything. It just went up quite a distance and then came back down. But that put a burn in me about space travel and rockets and stuff. As I got older, I always thought about working for NASA or something like that, and I didn't think that there was any way that an old redneck country boy from Ford City, Alabama would ever get to do something like that. And I went to college down at Auburn University, majoring in civil engineering, and I still had no idea that there was a possibility that I could do something like that. Of course, I majored in civil engineering, but I ended up working for the electrical engineering department of the local utility. And within 6 months, I had the title of electrical engineer, and I knew about as much about electrical engineering as I did about brain surgery. So I decided to go back to school at night and get an EE degree. So that's what I did. And while I was doing that, I heard about a job fair that was going on out at Marshall Space Flight Center, and also some of the major contractors around the Huntsville area. Just for clarity, Marshall Space Flight Center is on Redstone Arsenal outside of Huntsville, Alabama. So I went up there and interviewed, and I couldn't believe it. I got a couple of job offers. So I went to work for a major testing lab up there that was considered to be the premier test lab in the area. And one reason I chose them is I heard that I was told that a year there was like 3 years anywhere else as far as the experience that you gained. And they put me in everybody that came on new was put on a probationary program, and you had to go back to school and you had to take a bunch of more classes and everything. And I ended up getting certified for nuclear environmental qualification engineering as well as seismic engineering within the first 8 or 9 months. And working primarily on nuclear plants and stuff for the Navy, nuclear propulsion and things like that. And the Trident submarines were being designed and built then, and we did a lot of testing for the Trident submarines, both for the missile systems as well as the propulsion systems. And again, even though I was up there doing that, it was still hard for me to believe that I was actually doing that kind of stuff. After the 3 Mile Island incident, there was more opportunity to do stuff. The nuclear industry slowed down tremendously. So there was a lot more opportunity to do stuff with NASA. And I ended up leaving Wiley Laboratories where I worked, and I went to work for McDonnell Douglas Astronautics Corporation, or MACDAC they were called. And I was working right on directly for NASA. And started doing a lot of traveling. And spent a lot of time out in Phoenix, Arizona. Unisys Space Systems was out there then. I sort of got I figured Uncle Sam owned me from, 8 to 5, but after that I was on my own time. And I got out exploring around, and lo and behold, I found out, I started hearing Bigfoot sighting reports from off the Mogollon Rim, out northeast and east of Phoenix. So I started going out there and poking around, and lo and behold, I found boogers out there in the desert. And then we started going around to some other facilities, and I quickly learned that government facilities are some of the very best places to look for Bigfoot. And I've often wondered if some of these facilities weren't built at particular locations specifically to protect a population of Bigfoot, a native population of Bigfoot. It wasn't very long after I was working for McDonnell Douglas, they sent me back to school, and I had an opportunity to work in mission control. But I had to go back to school and get not necessarily a degree, but an engineering certification, which I still took the same classes as guys did, working on a degree in that field. And I ended up getting certifications in flight hardware engineering, which is the equivalent of aerospace engineering, flight electrical systems, which is like a specialty of electrical engineering, command and data management systems, which is a type of, which is all your uplink and downlink data, all of your flight computers, ground stations, and all of that, which is basically computer engineering. Life support systems, which there's not really a degree in that, but I was certified in life support systems. And I was took all the tests, and I was certified to man a console in mission control. Your first mission, you're actually not sitting behind the, manning the console by yourself. You've got a more senior engineer there watching over you and making sure that you don't mess anything up. And after the mission's over, then they vote on you and see if they want to keep you on or not. And you've got, I can't remember if it's either 3 or 5 missions to be voted on for them to decide that you were ready to man a console or a station, by yourself. And if you don't make it after either 3 or 5, then they cut you loose and let you do something else. But after 2 missions, I was confirmed as a full-fledged console engineer, and I was able to work either at Marshall Space Flight Center or Houston, or even Kennedy if needed. A lot of people don't realize there's 3 mission controls. Houston takes care of the launch and the landing. Marshall takes care of all experiment operations and all on-orbit operations. So I stayed mostly, since I was more payload-oriented and on-orbit operations oriented, most missions I was at Redstone Arsenal or Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. When the shuttle would land at Edwards Air Force Base, they always had to send a contingent out there of engineers and technicians to meet the shuttle. And a lot of the missions would have stuff that had to be deintegrated or taken off the shuttle before the shuttle was loaded on the back of a 747 and flown back to the Cape. I got to go on a couple of those missions. In the very first one, I ran into a guy out there in security who I had met some years before down at Eglin Air Force Base. And he and I had become somewhat friends acquaintances down there, and we were both interested in Bigfoot, and we had we'd figured out that there were Bigfoot on Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Well, I get down there and I run into this guy and at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and he says, "Hey, meet me at the NCO club at a certain time." So I said, "Okay." So I met him at the NCO club, and we got a table somewhere a little bit quiet, and he said, "You ain't gonna believe this." He said, "There are boogers out here." And I said, No way." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Not very many." He said, "But there are some out here." And anybody that knows anything about Edwards Air Force Base, that is one of the most desolate places on this planet. And the crazy thing was, he told me, he said, they know just about everyone that comes on base. And they know where they like to go, what dumpsters they like to raid, what canyons they come and go out of. And and they even had names for them. And I remember this one. It was an old one that maybe he might have been an alpha at one time, but his name was, they called him Pigpen because he was all dirty and disheveled all the time, and he was a loner, and he didn't have anybody to groom him. And then there was a little family unit, and had Big Daddy, Big Mama, and Junior and Sis, and then there was another one that they said that they'd had a third kid, and they hadn't named it yet. But like I said, they knew exactly their comings and goings. And the really interesting thing I found out was that anytime the shuttle was going to land, they actually had some vehicles that they had people in out a distance away from the landing strip, specifically watching for anything or anybody or even Bigfoot that might come wandering out and wander out onto the landing strip. They said the last thing they wanted was to film national TV, the shuttle flattening a booger. So, and I didn't believe that, but I looked, and sure enough, right where he said there were going to be these vehicles, there were vehicles out there, and they were, and one of them absolutely for sure was positioned right where they could perfectly see up into two canyons that they had found out that the boogers come and go out of. I quickly figured out who to talk to at these different government installations and military bases around the country that I would go to on business, and I could get pretty much right quickly to the source of Bigfoot sightings. So, like I said, I took full advantage of that, and around the country wherever I was, and all totaled over the years, I started doing this pretty seriously in 1975, and I still do I still do a fair amount of road trips, but I have been feet on the ground, actually in the boonies, rooting around, looking for Bigfoot sign, looking for Bigfoot in 43 out of 50 states. I haven't been to Oregon, and the only part of Washington I've been in is the eastern part, the desert areas, on the east slope of the, I guess those are the Cascade Mountains out there. But I've been out around the Yakima area and such. But one of the things that I discovered when I started doing, actually logging sighting reports back in the 70s, and I started that in 1978, actually writing down sighting reports and stuff and interviewing people. One of the things that didn't take me too long to figure out was that there was more than one kind of Bigfoot out there. Pretty quickly figured out that we had, in this part of the country, two types that I kept hearing about more than any. But I kept hearing about something else too that I didn't know what it was. I couldn't believe the things that were being told to me. And I started calling them type 1 and type 2. Well, I figured out later on that the type 1s are what we call the patty type now. And the type 2s are what, when the book Them Plus Us or Them and Us came out, the type 2s were basically what that book says that Neanderthals actually looked like. And except the artwork and the pictures in that book showed them with vertical slit pupils, and the noses weren't quite right. The nose needed to look a little bit more human-like, and they don't carry around spears. So lose the spear, put a little bit more human-looking nose on it, and more wide, flat nose, and and normal pupils, and lose the big canines, and you've got you a type 2 booger. Whereas the type 1s, the patty type, The females get up about 8 feet tall, something like that, maybe something a little taller. The males easily go 10 feet, 9.5, 10 feet. I have actually seen one with my own eyes. I heard many reports of it, and I actually saw it out in Texas, a 12-footer. And you can't even imagine the bulk of that thing. The ones that live here on our farm are type 1s. The alpha male that we had here for decades was just standing there relaxed looking at you. He was right at 10 feet tall. If he would have straightened himself up, I think he would have been 10.5, maybe 10.75 feet tall. But he never did that. But he was enormously wide across the shoulders. He was probably 4.5 feet wide across the shoulders. He threw a 22-inch track. We found his tracks out here, a number of times. And every time I measured them, they were 22 inches. He had about a 61-inch stride from the heel of one foot to the heel of one print or track to the heel of the next one. His weight was probably, and this is coming from multiple people that have seen him. Anybody who spent any time on this farm over the years would see him. And we're talking about people that have a lot of experience looking at all kind of livestock, large hogs, cattle, horses, and stuff like that. And we estimate that he weighed somewhere between 1,300 and 1,500 pounds, possibly even more. He was huge. He was probably close to 3 feet thick from his chest to his shoulder blades. Absolutely massive. I've seen him hit a tree limb, and we're talking about a tree limb that we could pull truck engines and tractor engines off of. I've seen him hit it, slap it, and crack that limb. I mean, his strength was unbelievable. But like I said, we've gotten him up. We've seen him up against things where we could very accurately gauge his height, numbers of times. He was out here, like I said, for decades. We think it was the same one. He disappeared here about 4 or 5 years ago, and the one we have now is not even a patch off of his pocket. I mean, he's about 9.5 feet tall, and he's only got about a 19-inch track, and he's not near as bulky and muscled up as the old guy. And I'm not sure he's even still around, because he got in a big fight with the alpha from the troop about a mile or so, about 2 miles east of us back in the spring. And I haven't seen or heard of him since. So he may be gone now. Don't know. But we have a lot of the juvies in the past would come up here around our houses and stuff and mess with us. We'd sit out on the porch in the evenings. They'd throw rocks out in the yard and such as that. They'd come up and slap the side of the house on occasion. They would leave things around. Got a deer head hanging out in a tree in the yard now that they left one night. And I think it was a deer that I was considering shooting back during the deer season about 2 years ago, and that rack, and I had game cam pictures of him, and his skull and with a rack attached, of course, showed up hanging in a tree in my front yard. About a week or so after that I had sat there and looked at it and thought about shooting it, but I decided he was too small and let him walk. We have sort of maintained a relationship with him since I was a boy. My dad used to always make sure that we had plum trees and persimmon trees and crab apples and stuff like that growing in the fence rows back on the back of the farm. he always made sure there were muscadine vines and such as that back there along in the tree lines and in the fence rows. And like I said, we planted our garden, and then I always went to the back of the farm and planted a bunch of stuff back there for the neighbors. In my research, I spent a lot of time trying to come up with about how many I thought there might be, using engineering methods and research type serious research methods, try to get an idea of what the population of them was here in the U.S. And I started studying habitat. I've taken some wildlife courses and such as that, and I know the carrying capacity for any species on any given piece of land is greatly dependent. Well, it's dependent on the quality of the habitat for that particular animal. So I got to looking around of where I could find an area that had a pretty constant population of them that I could get into and find pretty easily and keep account of them. And I discovered a 300 square mile area over in Mississippi. And that became my standard reference area. Within that 300 square mile area, now that sounds like a large area, but it's not. We're only talking about an area that's about 10 miles wide and about 30 miles long. In that area, I found and identified 6 different troops of boogers that lived in that area. Of those 6 troops, one of them was a troop of the type 1s or the patty types. 5 of them were troops of the type 2s or the Neanderthal types. When I first discovered that and figured that out, I figured that the type 2s would inbreed with the type 1s and basically wipe out the type 1s, that they would be gone within a couple of generations or a few years. That has not been the case. They are still to this day, and I've studied this area for around 30 years. And to this day, that troop of type 1s is still distinct and separate from the other troops of type 2s. And that makes sense because I've seen evidence in other areas of distinctive differences in some of the boogers. I know out west, I've taken a lot of reports of some types that sounded like that there may be additional types out west in the Cascades and such that have some not only physical characteristics that are different but also that their habits and stuff are different. Now, in Louisiana and East Texas, I started hearing about ones that some of the locals call them the snouted ones or the baboon-headed ones. And I started looking for evidence of them, and I started finding a fair amount of 3-toed tracks in some of these areas. But not always. And then lo and behold, this photograph showed up all over the internet, in the Bigfoot internet world, of the beast of 7 chutes. That is a baboon-headed Bigfoot. And I showed it around. I went back and talked to some of the people that I had interviewed and taken reports of these snouted ones or baboon-headed ones, or some people call them dog-headed ones. And turns out that, they said that was it. And so then I came up with a third type I call the type 3, I call it the beast of 7 chutes type. Interesting thing now, all 3 of these types have plantigrade feet. In other words, they're feet like us. When they're standing up, their heels are on the ground. When they walk, their heel hits the ground every step they make when they're walking upright. That's another thing. I was one of the first ones that discovered that they also can travel quadrupedally, and they can go quite fast that way. They also use that as a convenient way of disguising their tracks. All three type 1, 2, and 3 have plantigrade feet. Some of them only have 3 toes. I've seen a few 4-toed tracks. I've even seen a couple of 6-toed tracks. But I most commonly see, if they're not 5 toes, then 90 probably 95% of the time it's going to be 3-toed tracks. And they're pretty widespread. I've found them everywhere from Texas to Oklahoma to Mississippi, Louisiana. I've found 3-toed tracks within 20 feet of where I'm sitting right now. And they were juvenile tracks, but they were 3-toed. And I believe that's a throwback to the times when they got inbred back in the 1800s, 1900s. I believe that when the white man came into this country and used disease to try to wipe out the natives, that Bigfoot are close enough to us genetically that not only can they interbreed with us, but they're susceptible to our diseases. And I believe that probably the majority of the population of Bigfoot in this hemisphere were wiped out during the time that they were trying to wipe out the Indians by giving them infected blankets and such as that. And during the times that they purposely infected the buffalo herds with anthrax, they put infected cattle out in the areas where the buffalo could interact with them. And a lot of people think that the buffalo hunters wiped out the buffaloes, but they didn't. The buffaloes were wiped out by anthrax. And that's been scientifically proven. But consequently, there were a lot of pockets of Bigfoot left around the country, and the population was so small that they end up becoming inbred. And even in human beings, when they're inbred, fused toes and fingers are common. That's a common sign of inbreeding in humans even. During all this time, I kept hearing about another thing, about some that they said their legs looked like a dog standing up on its back legs, or if you stood a goat up on its back legs, or a dog up on its back legs. And I heard people talking about dogman, but very few people, but I had never seen one. So I really didn't believe it until my nose was rubbed in it in 1984. And that was, we had a project going on in South Alabama in preparation for the first Department of Defense secret mission of the space shuttle. And I had 2 ladies that worked for me down there building some hardware that was going to be used during that mission. And these ladies had top secret clearances and very reliable. And we were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on this until we got the hardware built. And these ladies worked day shift, and I was the lead engineer on that portion of the project, and I was working day shift also. One day these ladies came to work and they were very, very, very upset, and I'm not going to go into the full details of it, but ended up I wouldn't let them go out and work on the project because they were so upset, and I was on the verge of sending them home for the day. And I got to questioning them, what's got you so upset? Did you have a wreck? No. I went through a series of questions. Finally, I got out of them that they saw something that terrified them. And I said, okay, I can work with that. And so I said, just wait right here just a minute. So I went out to my car and I got one of my journals that I had my sighting reports in. And I brought it in, and we were staying at that point, we were staying in Troy, Alabama, and working in a nearby community. And these ladies were from Troy. And so I went in there and I opened up the journal to some sighting reports that I had taken in the previous couple of weeks since I'd been down there on that project. And it was some locations that they would know of, and possibly even some people that they would know. And when they saw that, they then opened up to me, and I said, well, what was it that you said? And they said they saw a huge werewolf. And I'm like, oh Lord, here we go again. And, I was hoping they'd say they saw a Bigfoot, but no, they said they saw a huge werewolf. And they said it was unbelievably evil. And one of the ladies swore up and down it was trying to suck her soul out of her body. And they had come around a curve in the highway. This is a 2-lane highway. Came around a curve, and just as the road was straightening out again, it was actually an S curve. And they came around the first half of the S curve and were straightening out, fixing to enter into the second half of the S curve, where it curved back to the right. And this thing walked up out of a creek bottom up onto the shoulder of the road, right next to a curve sign. The lady that was driving slammed on the brakes, and the car came to a stop just short of, and in fact, the hood of the car was just starting to pass the thing, and they stopped. The lady that was in the passenger seat said the thing leaned down and looked in the windshield at her, and that's when she said that the most unbelievable evil presence she'd ever been around. She said it was trying to suck her soul out of her body. She starts screaming at the lady that was driving to, go, 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 go. And the lady that was driving, she came to her senses and she floorboarded it and got out of there. As she was pulling away from the thing, she looked. And as they were pulling away, the thing leaned down and looked through the side windows at them. And the lady that was driving actually turned her head and locked eyeballs with it for a split second. And she also agreed that it was absolutely the most evil thing. She felt like it was trying to pull her soul out of her body too. As she was accelerating away, she looked up in the rearview mirror, and she said the thing crossed the highway in one step, that it just sort of kicked off it was standing right off the edge of the pavement. Said it kicked off and its foot landed right at the about middle of the opposite lane. And there was a high dirt bank on the left-hand side of the road there. And she said the next step that its foot was right at the base of the bank, and she said it went straight up that bank. The next track that I found on the bank was, and she said it went up the bank in 2 steps. And I found where it kicked off at the base of the bank. I found another step about 6 feet up, and the next step was right under the lip of the bank, and the bank was 13 feet high, just about. And then I found I found the second step was just below the lip of the bank, and then I found another step over the lip right before it went into the woods. This was definitely a strongly canine resembling track. It was proportionally wider than a normal canine, but it was, the shape of the pad was canine looking. The shape of the toes was canine looking. Absolutely not a bear track, absolutely not a cougar track or anything like that. The claws were distinctly different than a bear track, and tremendously different than what you would see on a cougar track. And of course, much, much larger than a cougar track. I did my usual thing. I got out my little stick of bamboo with a white paper plate stapled to it. And I had one of the ladies turn their back, and the other lady I got there by the side. She told me where the thing was standing, and I got where it was standing. I could tell pretty much where it was standing because the gravel was disturbed. And I held the thing up and told her to stop me when the paper plate was where its head was. And she stopped me and then put it at about 9.5 feet tall. And so then the other lady turned around. I asked her to do the same thing. She stopped me at almost identical, within an inch or so of the same place. So it determined it's about 9.5 feet tall. I specifically asked them about its legs, and they said it was big dog legs. And in other words, the hock, it had a hock on it just like a dog, or a goat or anything like that. And so suddenly I realized that there really is a dogman. And I decided right quick that I didn't want to meet one. That I wasn't interested in finding anything. But I also realized that the first reports that I ever took in 1978 were dogman reports. They were trying to explain to me what they were seeing, but my mind was closed, and I couldn't accept that there was something out there besides Bigfoot, besides what I had seen on my farm. And I thought they were just mistaken. I actually went back and re-interviewed the very first report I took. There were 3 people involved. I'd interviewed all 3 of the people. The second report I took was only 1 person. And then the third report I had taken was 1 person. And so I went back and I found 2 of the people from the first interview. And I re-interviewed them, and I can remember the older son of this family. He said, "We tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen to us." And of course, I'm backing up 6 years, to go back and straighten this report out. So now I've got, 4 types that I'm trying to learn about and research. I got type 1, 2, and 3 regular Bigfoot. Then I've got dogmen, which I call them type 4. But dogmen have distinctly different feet. They have digitigrade feet. In other words, they walk on their toes. Normally, these like this that have all these qualities are usually around prices on them starts around $1,800.
Holy cow!
And I didn't have $1,800 to blow. Yeah. Plus, I wasn't going to spend that kind of money unless I could hold it and see it. Right. It was going to require me going to wherever I could get one. I drove past dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times an old abandoned antique store out in the middle of nowhere north of Macon, Missouri, up on the tall grass prairie in northern Missouri. I was driving down the road one day, and I don't know where we were going. I looked over there, and there was a car sitting there. And I'd been driving past that thing for years. And I said, "Hey, there's a car over there." And the then wife says, let's go see if they're open. And we both said, "Let's go see if they're open." Turned around, crossed the median, go back, went up there. Yeah, we're open. There was just one lady in there. So I went looking at the old tools. I like to buy old tools and fix them up, like old axes and shovels and stuff. And my wife, she goes looking for dishes and crap like that. We'd been in there probably 30 minutes, and my cell phone rang, and she said, "Hey, I think I found one of those horns you've been looking for." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, I believe so." And she, "Let me send you a picture." So she sent me a picture. I like to dad. And I said, "Where are you?" And she said, I'm in the northwest corner of the store." I said, "Don't go anywhere." And I took off just on a run. This is a pretty good sized store. I mean, big. It was actually built in a big old barn. And I took off, went over there, and she was standing there holding it. And I grabbed it, and I looked at it, and I said, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, this is it." And I said, it's absolutely perfect. And I said, how much they want for it? And she said, well, there was this little tag here laying on it. It's $35. And I had a research partner that he and I worked on this for years, deciphering old biblical stuff and ancient Greek, ancient Aramaic and stuff like that, even Egyptian. And so I sent him a picture. I says, look what I found. And he went crazy. Buy it. And he said, anyway, so I went up there, and I just knew that she was going to tell me that, oh, that's supposed to be $350, or that's supposed to be $3,500 or something. No, she said, no, it's $35. So I got it. And I'd been working with a mystic, a Jewish mystic up in upstate New York. And I sent him a picture of it, and he said, yep. He had me take very specific close-up pictures of it and send to him, and he said, yep, that's it. You got the right one. I think it was a God thing. And we were to the point in our research where we couldn't go further without one. This is one of the prime elements that was used to bring down the walls of Jericho. And it was a dissonant ultrasound that was injuring our ambassadors and embassy staff in Cuba, permanently messing them up. Those dissonant sounds and dissonant frequencies will actually break down the crystalline structure of materials. I need to go back and start and tell them about that. One of the main things we used to do is vibration analysis there in my job as an engineer, as an R&D and test engineer, because that, these bad vibes tear up, destroy missiles, aircraft, and everything else. Go back and look at the de Havilland Comet. They literally fell apart in midair because of vibes at the vibration at a high frequency vibration that the structure of the aircraft wasn't designed to, or they didn't know about it then. And it actually broke down the crystalline structure of the aluminum, and the planes fatigued in the air and fell apart. And that's like, you remember the Boeing 727 or 737 that part of the roof blew off in Hawaii years ago? Well, that was that fracturing was accelerated by vibration and the stress of many landing and takeoffs and pressurization and depressurization cycles. A major part of my career was spent doing vibration analysis, and everything from very low frequency stuff in the earthquake range, in other words, pretty much 0 to about 35 hertz, and then high frequency vibration in the area above the threshold of human hearing, like 20,000 hertz and up. And it's very extremely important that vibration analysis is done on any type of aircraft or spaceship. Aluminum is which is the main building material of aircraft and missiles and such, and the frame and skin of the inner skin of the shuttle. Aluminum is extremely susceptible to stress fatigue and crystalline degradation due to vibration, and getting vibration induced fractures in the metal and along the crystalline lattice or through the crystal structure of the aluminum. Let's just say that. In the course of doing that, I learned that not only how a lot of these frequencies affect materials, but how they affect people, and how it affected materials other than what we were testing. For instance, one of the things that was one of the big technological leaps that had to be overcome for the space shuttle was how to keep the thermal tiles on the shuttle. The skin of the space shuttle is covered with ceramic tiles to protect it from the heat of reentry. We were trying to develop an adhesive that would attach those, that we could attach the ceramic tiles to the aluminum skin of the shuttle that could withstand the vibration, their horrendous vibration, both in decibel level as well as amplitude during launch, and then then all the forces of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and landing. During that time, we were using the world's largest and loudest acoustic chamber, at least known in the free world anyway. And in the process of testing we had wing sections and such as that of shuttle wing sections, and this is before the shuttle ever flew its first flight. And we would glue the ceramic tiles onto the skin of the wing, or if it might be a body section, and then we would subject it to the noise and the vibration of an actual launch, which we typically ran between 160 and up to almost 170 decibels of acoustic energy. And it was multi-frequency, but a lot of it was tailored towards the high frequencies, up above 20,000 hertz. It was amazing when we first started it how when that section of that wing would get hit by that acoustic energy, how those tiles would just shuck off like nothing. I mean, just like they were being held in place with an electromagnet, and all of a sudden you just turn the magnets off, and they just fall off. All the tile would fall off. I mean, it was amazing how they came off. There was a technician that every test that we ran, the technician would have to, a couple of guys pick up his big old heavy Craftsman roll around tool chest and lift it up and set it up into the chamber and roll it over to the test stand and work on the test specimen and put new tiles on and do different tweaks and stuff like that. And then they'd have to roll it over and then pick that big heavy thing up and set it out. And this thing weighed a couple 100 pounds at least, maybe might have weighed 300 pounds. It was pretty tough lift. Well, the technician decided that he was tired of that, and he was just going to just roll it over in a corner of the acoustic chamber and leave it there during the test. And a couple of the guys told him, "No, you don't need to do that. You don't want to do that. This thing," he said, "Well, this ain't aluminum. Like what? This is steel. It ain't gonna hurt this steel. This is forged steel, and all top quality tools." And so, okay, if that's what you want to do. So he left it sitting over in a corner. He talked with a couple of now I was not an acoustic engineer by any means. I would go down there just mostly out of curiosity, but a little of it did. The instrumentation and stuff that they used was extremely similar to the stuff that we used in the testing that I was involved in. So that was my purpose of going down there. But I got to watch a lot of the testing. So they left this thing in there. The acoustic expert, they decided, okay, we'll put it over here. That to be less, you'll get less energy over in this part of the chamber than these other parts. So they fired the thing up, and while it was going, if you went back and looked at the video, you could see pieces of something skittering across the floor of the acoustic chamber. When the test was over, and the test would last 90 to 100 20-something seconds, if I remember correctly. It was, the length of the shuttle main engine burns plus maybe an extra 10%. You can look that up and see how long it took them how long they burned the shuttle main engines to get them on orbit. But anyway, so they ran that first test with his toolbox sitting in there, and they saw pieces of stuff skittering across the floor. They thought they did, but they weren't sure because they were fairly small. And after the test, they opened the chamber up, went in there, and that toolbox was all to pieces. The sheet metal structure, the sheet steel that box was made out of had crystallized and just ripped to pieces. And I think the biggest piece of steel that they picked up was maybe about the size of a silver dollar. Now, the wrenches and the ratchets and the sockets and all were laying there and looked to be in good shape. But you could pick up one of those wrenches and tap it on something hard and it would just fall apart. Or a socket and you could drop it or throw it down on a concrete and it would just shatter like glass. Same thing with the ratchets. Everything, the toolbox and everything in it was destroyed during that one run. And that's when I realized the unbelievable power of, that acoustic energy has, how bad it really is, or how strong it really is. I was really amazed by the power of that acoustic energy. And I also, due to the fact that we were doing a lot of seismic simulating earthquakes and testing nuclear equipment, safety-related equipment that goes in nuclear plants to see if they could survive and operate safely during a major earthquake in a place like, California and such. And I had learned that much of the spectrum of an earthquake is within the infrasound area. In other words, below the threshold of human hearing. I had figured out that Bigfoot use infrasound, as well as several other animals. Elephants use it, tigers use it, turkeys use it, believe it or not. But Bigfoot use it not only as a weapon against us, but as they can use it also for communicating amongst themselves. Elephants use it for communications. Tigers use it as a weapon. Turkeys use it as to attract a mate when they're strutting and drumming. If you're ever close to them, you actually can feel the ground shake, and that's infrasound that the turkeys are emitting. Infrasound can have a very strong effect on the human body. It can create feelings of anxiety, giddiness, fear. I mean, depending on how you manipulate it, it can create all kinds of different reactions. When we figured that out, there were a couple of certain people that were pretty universally reviled out there in the labs, and we very often would subject them to some pretty high levels of infrasound when they came around, and to convince them to move on. Don't hang around out there where we were. And anyway, I hope the statute of limitations is out on that, but we never did hurt it. We never did permanently hurt any of them, but we certainly could control, how long they wanted to hang around in the area. There's even a lot of people have heard about the brown note, and that I don't know about that, but I know that there is a yellow note. We pretty much proved that. And I've actually seen in the field researchers that were exposed to infrasound become physically ill and actually suffer from anaphylactic shock. I've witnessed that myself numbers of times. I've even exposed myself to different types of infrasound and to see what it would do. And there are many, many, many ways that it can be used and applied. Just as there are many, many ways that ultrasound can be used and applied. We discovered that with ultrasound, that you can set up a frequency like a drone frequency, and then over the top of it use different types of dissonant frequencies along with it that can have an extremely strong effect on both materials and humans. If you guys remember the news items from a few years ago where the Cubans were using dissonant ultrasound to damage and hurt the embassy, the ambassadors and the embassy staff at the American embassy in Havana. That's a fact. You can look it up. And that dissonant ultrasound can actually break down solid materials such as rocks and obviously steel and aluminum and such. It can break down any material with a crystalline structure, as well as it can damage nerves and vision and brain tissue. I mean, a lot of different things in a human, depending on how you use it and how you focus it. The French did a lot of research in using sound as a weapon, and I studied that. I studied that research. They found out that you can do a lot of bad things with infrasound, but you can't focus infrasound. That's the low frequency, below 20,000 hertz. As proof of that, your subwoofer, you can hide a subwoofer anywhere in a room, but you can't tell where the sound is coming from. Infrasound or super low frequency sound spreads in all directions readily. Ultrasound, on the other hand, can be highly focused. Think of a tweeter on a high-end speaker system. The tweeter has to be aimed carefully for the listener to hear it well, and it can be aimed very, very precisely. Ultrasound, as the frequency goes up, you can aim it even more accurately. You can also carry more energy. You can pack a lot of decibels into that waveform. And it can be focused and used as a weapon over a much greater distance than infrasound can. Any material that had a crystalline form to it, or that had a crystal lattice in it, you could destroy it. You could break it down into the individual crystals using nothing but acoustic energy, if you had the time and knew exactly what to do and how to tune it. And you could also severely injure humans or any living being, as a matter of fact. The thing about the infrasound, the low frequency, was that generally you could recover from the effects of it with one sleep cycle. I saw that with other researchers that were affected by the infrasound, that they would have shock-like symptoms until and some of them would actually just almost pass out. But once they went through a sleep cycle, they were recovered and about good as new. And I even subjected myself to it to see how it affected me. And I found it, I figured out how to make myself sick. And interesting thing with the infrasound, we found that you can make people see apparitions. You can infrasound and vibrations, infrasound vibrations in air ducts and stuff can cause a symptom called sick building syndrome, where you can have, like I found, I was working at a university at the time, and we had a building where the professors didn't like to have offices in there, and there were classrooms in that area of that building, and the students didn't like to have classes in there. Well, I got to doing some research on what was going on, and I found that someone had changed a sheave or a pulley in the air conditioning system and changed the rotational speed of a big blower in there, and it was creating a standing infrasound resonance in the air column, in the ductwork. And it truly was creating an unhealthy situation in that part of the building. All we had to do was I got one of my maintenance guys to change out the pulley and go back to what was supposed to have been there from the factory. Problem fixed. But again, that was not creating any kind of a permanent problem with the professors or the students that were exposed to it. Whereas with the ultrasound, because it was much more highly focused, it does cause problems. Now, long about that time, we started, when we noticed the effects of the ultrasound on things, and the fact that it could actually be used as an acoustic weapon, myself and another gentleman got to thinking about some other things that in the Bible. And one of the things was bringing down the walls of Jericho. And I'll come back to that. But in the process of that, there was always talk in the community wondering what was the relationship with Bigfoot and the Nephilim. There's a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go into all the scriptures. Y'all can look it up yourself if you're interested enough. But there's a lot of information about the Nephilim and the origin of the Nephilim in the Old Testament and in some of the non-canonical books like the Book of Enoch. Just because some conference of the church back in the back after, some within a few hundred years after Christ passed, or had died and resurrected, just because some group of those guys didn't choose a book to be a part of our Bible, doesn't mean that information in that book is not true. The Book of Enoch is one of those. There's a lot of stuff in the Book of Enoch about Nephilim and other things. So we got to trying to figure out how we could figure out how what we could do to prove or disprove if Bigfoot are Nephilim or are related to Nephilim. I do know this, that in my research I have found numbers of instances where Bigfoot have interbred with humans. I have met some of these humans myself personally. I'm not going to tell who, where, or whatever, but I worked with with several different native tribes. Many of the tribes have a designated person or persons in that tribe that are the designated expert or go-between, or they're in charge of they're in charge of what goes on with the Bigfoot. Let's just put it that way. I have met several of them with several tribes. Now, we got to thinking, what can we do? What can we do to prove? Reading in the Old Testament, there are some scriptures in there that specifically say that the Nephilim are compelled to respond to the voice of God. My research partner got to delving into that more deeply, going back into the ancient Aramaic, and which is the pre-Hebrew, and ancient Greek, and realized that the voice of God referenced here is not what comes out of God's mouth, not what he says, but it was actually referring to, when you studied the root of that phrase, that they are referring to an object rather than speech. And it took quite a bit of digging around to verify this. So my friend actually contacted me and asked me to do some digging and see what I thought. So I did. And I had to agree with him. So then we went into a lot of research. Okay, if the voice of God is an object, what is it? What are they referring to? It took a lot of digging over a long period of time to finally find out that what they were referring to was a very, very specific type and configuration of shofar. A shofar is a horn, is a Jewish ceremonial horn that is literally a horn. We learned that there are three types of shofars, at least three, that are commonly used. There are some that are made out of goat's horns. There are some that are made out of ibex horns, and there are some that are made out of kudu horns. And an ibex is a desert animal that lives around there's different types of them that live around the world. There are desert ibex that live in the Holy Land and in the land of the Garden of Eden, in Iran and Iraq. Of course, there's goats everywhere, and the kudu is an African antelope. Is a very large antelope species in Africa. Asking around the different Jewish people that I knew, I got nowhere. So when I was in college, I was so interested in this stuff that I took some actual college courses in the Old Testament and New Testament. So I went back to my one professor in particular and asking for help with this, about what is this voice of God? What type of shofar? I mean, we believe they're talking about a shofar, but what kind? And he basically directed me. He said, you're not going to find out through normal means. He said, you're going to have to contact one of these guys that's considered to be a mystic. So then I went to started the long path of trying to find a Jewish mystic. These guys aren't quite as rare as you would think. There are a number of mystic apostles and saints documented in the history of the church. There is one that's pretty well known. He was not John, that was not John the Baptist, not John the disciple that was there with Jesus, but it was I can't remember it was John of something. I don't remember his name, but anyway, It took me a good bit, but I finally tracked down a Jewish mystic and contacted him. It took me trying to contact him multiple times before he would even answer an email and or a text. Finally, back and forth through the little cryptic notes that he would send me, that he would send back to me, he finally got where he would talk to me. And so I told him what I was doing, what I was trying to find out. And it sort of got piqued his interest. But he wouldn't tell me anything straight up. He wanted to make me work for it, which I'm really glad that he did. So he would give me a couple of little clues, couple of little hints, and tell me to go off and dig around, see what I could find, and get back with him. And that's what I did. This went on for several years. Eventually, I found out that yes, that the voice of God that they were referring to was a kudo horn shofar. But it was a very, very specific type of kudo horn shofar. And here is one right here. I'm not gonna tell what all the specific characteristics have to be, but you can look at what I've got here and get sort of a start. But I'll tell you up front that this is a line of research that you don't want to dig into. But let me go on. I'll cut to the chase and tell you that I was able to use. I eventually figured out how to use it. I found out that the thing is exceedingly difficult to blow correctly, to summons the Nephilim. There are only 2 notes out of the many, many, many that can be produced by that will work to summons the Nephilim. I have years invested in finding those 2 notes. In the process of doing that, I accidentally called them to my home. I accidentally called Bigfoot to my home using that. That was not a very pleasant experience. They came up, they walked through my wife's flower bed and destroyed some of her plants. They came up on our back deck and came up to our bedroom door that went out onto the deck and was looking in the door at us. And it's not very pleasant to wake up at, and these are full glass atrium doors. And let me tell you, it's not very pleasant to wake up at 1 a.m. and your dogs are going absolutely crazy, and you sit up in the bed and there's a Bigfoot standing there on your deck right outside, bent down, looking in your bedroom door at you, and all of your security lights are on. All of my motion detector lights are on, and it doesn't care. It's standing there looking in at you. That's not a very pleasant thing. So one of the things I learned is that you do absolutely positively do not mess around with one of these things around your home. Where I practiced was in an old hospital building that had been shut down, and I got down in one of the old x-ray rooms that was lined with lead sheets. And that's where I practiced this thing so that the sound wouldn't get out. This room was down in the guts of the hospital so that it couldn't be heard anywhere around. And I practiced for months. I practiced so much that my lips would bleed. I'd get blood blisters on my lips and practicing with that thing. And after talking with the mystic and him referring me to old Bibles and stuff dating all the way back into the 1500s and 1600s, I finally figured out how to blow it to get the notes that that are required. And he told me how to know when I hit the right notes. And I finally got where I recognized the correct notes. And so I contacted some of my research buddies up in Iowa. I was living just south of the Iowa state line at the time in Missouri. And we took off up there one evening and went to a place where I had had fantastic results, just, calling them with my mouth before. And got up there, and there I was in a field, and I couldn't get it to work. And I worried with that thing and tried for about 30 minutes, and finally got one proper squawk out of it that lasted about a second, and no results. Nothing happened. But, obviously right there weren't any within earshot. So we moved about 4 miles, 3 or 4 miles to another place. And I got out there and I started trying to blow it again. And even though I wasn't hitting the right note, the woods went very, very quiet. There were no bugs, no frogs, no crickets, nothing. And it took me about 15 minutes this time, and I hit one of the notes and was able to hold it for about a second and a half. The woods absolutely erupted. We started hearing boogers yelling and screaming from 3 different directions. I started trying to blow it again, and I hit the second note for maybe a half to 3/4 of a second. And things got even crazier then. It was very obvious that they were coming in fast and loud from 3 directions. And we could tell they were bearing down on us. I mean, they were running through the woods, like a NFL running back running through a high school football line. And we didn't know exactly what to do right at first. Now we were fairly heavily armed, but our feet was telling us to run and get in the truck and get the heck out of Dodge. There were 5 of us. We got right up close to the truck, and we were in an open area, so we had an open buffer zone around us. And we figured that once they busted out of the woods, that we would have at least a few seconds to dive into the truck. We hoped. Now, this is when things got really crazy. All of a sudden, out in the road, now there was a bright moon that night. In the road in front of us, all of a sudden we see this big pack of coyotes come out into the road. And I'm talking about a big pack of coyotes. We're talking a dozen and a half coyotes. Different sizes, grown ones, coyote pups. They come out in the road and they're all hunkered down and they're terrified. They got their tails between their legs. Their ears are down in a very submissive, and they're crouched down and they're looking all around. They see us and they come to us. They came up to us and they got within about 5 to 6 feet of the front of my truck and just all laid down right in the middle of the freaking road. And we're on a gravel county road up in Iowa at this time, but it's a wide enough road that there's clearly 2 lanes. But at the time of night we were there was no traffic on this road, and these coyotes got right in the middle of the road and laid down. And they're looking all around us, and they first laid down about 20 feet out, but then they as the boogers were getting closer, they keep ooching closer and closer to us. And finally, when they looked like probably the alpha male or so, and the main adults of the pack were within about 5 or 6 feet of the front of the truck, they stopped. But here these coyotes are, and they've obviously come to us for protection. And we didn't know whether to wind our butts or scratch our watches. And the boogers come roaring in on us. I mean, raising Cain. And when they get to the tree lines, they slam on the brakes. And one troop made it there ahead of the other two. All right, in our group, we have 4 thermal imagers and 1 really good night vision scope. And we're looking at these guys, and when the troop came, I'm talking about daddy, mama, all the kids, everybody came. And then the second troop gets there, and they bust out into on the tree line, literally only like 50 yards, less than 50 yards from the first one. And normally, if you get 2 troops like that close together, there's going to be a fight. They totally ignored each other. That was really weird. Then the third troop gets there that's coming in from sort of straight north. One troop came from the southwest. One troop came from the southeast. That's the one that got there first. One's from the southwest, got there second. One's from just about due north, got there third. And they all came out to the edge and just slammed on the brakes. And they're just standing there looking at us. The poor old coyotes are flattening themselves out as flat and making themselves as little as they possibly can. We don't know what to do. They're sitting there. The boogers are just standing there. We're looking at them with our thermals. We're passing around the night vision scope because it was a really good one, and because we could see a little bit more detail with it. And even some of them, there was 1 or 2 in each one of the troops that was doing the rocking back and forth that they do when they're a little bit nervous. But mostly they just stood there. And it was interesting to see the females and some of the juvies trying to keep the little ones corralled. The little ones, they're like, oh boy, what's going on? They want to run around, but you could see through the night vision, you could see that there was, in each troop, there was 2 or 3 or so that were working to keep the little ones corralled and from not running off. Well, this went on for about 30 minutes. We don't know what to do. We don't know it was obvious that they were looking for something. They wanted something. We didn't know what. So they hung around for about, I guess, probably 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes. And the alpha male of the Southwest group, he just sort of, you could tell he got tired of waiting. He just turned around and he walked off about, 15, 20 yards and stopped. And he stood there until another one of the adults walked back there with him. And then he'd walk a little bit further, he waited until all of the rest of his troop would come up there before he would move further away. And then the other 2 troops started doing that. They started slowly moving away. Now, they never paid any attention to the other troops. None of them did. They went back the way they came. So we didn't know what to think, but we knew another place that was about a 25, 30-minute drive from there that traditionally has always had a lot. So we went to that location, called again, same results. Even if it took me 20 minutes of blowing the wrong notes, when I finally hit either one or both, if I could hit one and then roll into the other one, it always got results. Even if I could only hold it for half a second, to 3/4 of a second, it always got results. So we went to another place, and that second place, we were down by a levee on the Mississippi River, and we were on the river side of the levee, and we had found a place where the part of the levee had washed away, and it made like a perfect amphitheater in the levee. And that's where we stood and where we called from. What we didn't count on was we couldn't see on the other side of the levee from us. And I was blowing the shofar and pointing it away from the levee. But what we didn't count on was that Boogers on the back side of the levee would hear it and come. We'd been standing there for a while, and we had 2 troops out in front of us, and one of the guys standing beside me punches me with his elbow, and he goes like that. And I turn around and look up. There is a big alpha male standing there on top of the levee, literally with his toes were less than 6 feet above our heads. And he's just standing there glowering down on us like that. And now you talk about a brown shorts moment. That was about it. If he had had any animosity towards us or any anger towards us, we'd have never known what hit us. He could have killed every one of us before we could have run 2 steps. He could have jumped right in the middle of us, but he didn't. And he stood there. Again, the same thing happened as before. They stood around for a while and then started, wandering away after about at least 30 minutes. The big guy above us, we heard him walk down the back side of the levee. We heard him, busting some brush and stuff as he walked away, but then he stopped and don't know where he ever went. The crazy thing though, that guy never made a sound when he was coming. He never made a sound, never called, never did anything. He just showed up. Whereas the other 2 troops that came, and he was a loner. We didn't see any other member of his troop, if he had a troop. It was only him up there on top of that levee. So I don't know if he was just an old loner or or what. But so we went to another place that wasn't too far away and had and I think it wasn't far enough away. I believe that we did get 1 troop to come, but looking at it on a map later on, I was pretty sure that the 2 that had come at the previous place were within earshot of where we went to that 3rd location. Now, so that's in Iowa. All right, I've tried it in various locations in Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi. Can't remember if I've done it in Georgia, but in a couple of other states, we had the same results wherever we went. During this time, because it became very, very obvious that these Bigfoot were coming in expecting something. We could absolutely positively tell that they were expecting something out of us. So I started digging into the scriptures again. And what I discovered was somewhat disturbing. In the end times, according to a couple of different scriptures that I found, in the end times, the Nephilim will be summoned, and they, along with other animals, will be loosed upon the world. And their purpose is to kill off 1/4 of the population of the earth. And as best as I could tell, the personage that's going to be summoning them is an archangel. I don't know if it's Gabriel or Michael or who, but it's going to be an archangel that summons them. Now, that raises a question. What kind of people are they going to be wiping out? Are they going to be... That tells me that they're probably not going to be wiping out Christians, but they're going to be wiping out maybe demons that walk on the earth, or maybe non-Christians, or people that have given themselves over to the devil, or what. I don't know. But what I do know is that the shofar is too dangerous of a thing to be fooling around with. And so we stopped all research with the shofar. We don't do it anymore. And I strongly recommend, because we do not know, we know what they're waiting on. They're waiting to be loosed upon the earth is what they're waiting on. And I don't want to be the one that does that. And so I strongly recommend. I've searched, there's quite a few people have searched diligently for further answers, and because of the lack of information, and there's some things that us mortals will never know. But one thing that this mortal knows, that I am not messing with a shofar in the field anymore. And I strongly recommend anybody that thinks they're wanting to do that you cease and desist. Now, there's a lot of people out there, not a lot of people, there are some people out there that acting like that they're the ones that discovered the shofar and all that. That is not true. Myself and my research partner, who wants to remain anonymous on this, we've got close to 15 years of our lives invested into this research. And, we were doing it a full decade before anybody else ever heard of it. Now, let's jump back a little bit to the ultrasound. In the process of doing all this, we figured out how the walls of Jericho were brought down. If you go back and look and dig back deep enough and far enough, you can find old illustrations and old Bibles and other ancient texts and things where it shows the Israelites marching around the city of Jericho. And if you've got the right ones, you'll see that the Israelites were blowing mostly goat horn shofars. And then, depending on which one you look, there's a group that are blowing ibex horn shofars. And the angels are blowing kudo horn shofars. The combination of that can produce the dissonant sound that I've been talking about, that can break down the crystalline structure of the rocks. The dissonant frequencies that were created by the massed amounts of, hundreds or thousands of Israelites plus hosts of angels all blowing those shofars together created a dissonant, loud dissonant noise similar to what was produced in our acoustic chambers when we were testing the shuttle tiles. And it broke down the crystalline structure of the rocks in the walls of the Jericho, and that's what brought the walls down, is they actually fractured the crystalline structure of the rocks. And I wouldn't bet $1 million on that, but I would say that I'm 99.9998% sure that if it happened, that's how it happened. My motivation is not to make money off Bigfoot. I couldn't care less about making money off Bigfoot. My motivation is education. I've spent most of my life trying to learn more about these things. I'm 69 years old. I'm wanting to pass on this information. A lot of people have told me I need to write a book. Well, I've started writing a book 3 or 4 times. I've got probably enough chapters written I could throw one together within a few short weeks. and I might do that. But I enjoy working with people. I enjoy taking folks out in the woods and trying to teach them hands-on. I took these folks here out on the back of my farm, and we did a little hollering and a little bit of just hanging out back there. And I think we heard some vocalizations, and but there's not very many people in this world that can teach you the difference between a male Bigfoot track and a female Bigfoot track, and can teach you how to tell the difference if the female's pregnant or not by her tracks. Well, very pregnant or not. And I learned a tremendous amount of what I know from a gentleman who was he's Native American out of the Choctaw tribe, and he started teaching me some things. I learned a lot from my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, but this gentleman, we were working together, and he taught me a whole lot more. And he took me out and showed me a lot of things that when he first started showing me, I didn't really quite appreciate what it was he was teaching me, but now I do. And I want to do that in the future. And I enjoy going to, we have outings at different places around the country at different times, and I enjoy that. I may start going to some Bigfoot conventions and speaking more. I've put on presentations at numbers of state parks and such, and but like I said, teaching is my motivation, not money. The most important thing I think that people need to know about these things is it's not Harry and the Hendersons. They're individuals just like us. Most of them are good. Most of them you don't have to worry too much about. But I have been in on the investigations of a surprising number of deaths due to Bigfoot and disappearances due to Bigfoot. I have worked with state bureaus of investigation. I've worked with some FBI agents. I've worked with sheriff's departments. I'm surprisingly right now working with some ex-game wardens. I have worked with military personnel. I've worked with security personnel on different sites. There are Bigfoot out there that will hurt you. There are Bigfoot out there that will kill you and eat you. There are Bigfoot out there, if you do the wrong thing, that will snatch your head off so fast you never know what's coming. And by the way, that's one of their favorite ways of, when they're angry, of killing human beings, is they literally snatch the head right off their body. And it's pretty well documented if you know where to look. But you need to treat these creatures with respect. Another thing I'd say is the very last thing you ever want to do is hurt one of these things intentionally. You absolutely do not want to shoot at one under any circumstances, unless they've got a hold of one of your loved ones trying to drag them off. You just don't want to do that. But you can get out there and you can learn about them, but just be careful. And something I tell every single group that I speak to, every single new person that I teach, I tell them, when you go out there in the woods and you go to park your car, you turn your truck, you turn that dude around and you have your vehicle pointed in the fastest way out of there, so that all you have to do is get in it, is jump in it, crank it up, throw it in gear, and put it to the floor. Because you never know when you're going to need to open up an extra large, super fast acting can of Gone. And trust me, if it hasn't happened to you yet, you ain't been researching very long. And I don't care who they are. There's people, I'd never run off from Bigfoot. that person hasn't researched very much. If a person ever tells you that, he's not a researcher. And I'll tell you something else. There is no such thing as an expert on Bigfoot. The more I learn about Bigfoot, the more questions that I have. Anybody says that they're an expert on Bigfoot, don't believe them. Do not believe them. And I'll say another thing. There's a lot more to learning about Bigfoot than casting tracks. You can have a whole closet full of tracks, track cast, and still not know, what things they like to eat, how they travel quadrupedally, how they hide those tracks when they want to, and many, many, many other things. So I guess I'll sign off for now. And thank you for your time.